Greetings, nerds. This is Scene and Nerd. I'm your host, Sarah Belmont, and with me, as always, is our Mr. Producer, Will Polk. How are you doing tonight, Will?
Doing very well, Sarah. Happy Monday. Looking forward to talking to House of the Dragon with you. Been thinking about this episode ever since since I watched it last night. As far as just the wars no longer just being fought with dragons, but now we're being fought with guerrilla tactics and all that kind of stuff. So definitely looking forward to talking about that with you tonight, among other things.
Yeah, we are talking House of the Dragon, Season 3, Episode 5, Unbowed and Unbent. As the search for Aemond and Vhagar continues, Daemon attempts to control a spiraling situation in King's Landing. This was written by Philippa Goslett and directed by Nina Lopez Corrado. We're going to start with Team Gold Cloak.
Do it.
So, based on the ending of last week's episode and the ending featuring Rhaenyra and the command and everything, at what point before it was like really stated that this, did you know that immediately, or did it take Daemon like referencing the command that she gave last week of being like, oh, this is retaliation?
It was coming. I think given how with all the things, with no money, it's just basically from the moment that Rhaenyra has like been back in King's Landing, nothing has gone. The governing has been very difficult, and this is just one more thing of it happening. Knowing how yes, conquering the land is easy. Administering things is difficult. So I think with the Gold Cloaks being assaulted, especially and I think that it was a warning because of things are scarce in town. Money is very tight. And so instead of ignoring the insults and stuff that were going on, I think it definitely escalated things. And then of course, we learned that Ormund is behind a lot of the townsfolk's.
Think that initially?
Well, I suspect that something was going on. Yes, I did think that because just from what we've talked about with Ormund and just his scheming nature and his tactical nature, one of the things that Team Green had been missing was a tactician as someone to yeah. Well, but after Otto was gone, I mean, they were just kind of adrift. You had the two brother.
I know what you're saying. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
they swapped out Otto for Ormond. I mean,
Yeah,
that was the exchange at the beginning of the season. But I thought it was well executed because as soon as it was mentioned, like and I like the subtlety. There's a lot of subtleness in the dialogue this week, and just he doesn't blatantly say it. And I always purposely skip previously on. I purposely do it because I want the episode to be strong enough where I don't need a previously on to remember things that happened. Because I don't want to be thinking, oh yeah, they showed that on the previously. And I want to be like, oh yeah, I remember that from last week. That tells me, that kind of measures my engagement in the show and the overall story that's going on. So just to reference, like, you gave the order, and I love how because we had the exact discussion last week. It wasn't her intent that they went that brutal. So, and we didn't even see a lot of it, lot of brutality. And very much like how when this is mentioned, it seems very just, oh, this is happening. And then Daemon's immediately concerned, but there's also this air about it where it's like, oh, that's just a side piece of information of something going on. I mean, 2 dead cloaks. And I like how you described it as assaulted. Because we later learn that as the storyline progresses in the episode, their throats are split, and then they are also disemboweled. So I wouldn't know. I don't think that's assault. I think that's murder and torture. So there's a progression, and it's 2 dead cloaks, 2 more, and then it leads to the Feast of Traitors scene at the very end. That was very well done and kind of akin to a lot of the imagery and that we saw 2 weeks ago with Rhaenyra and her episode and Psychosis. So I just like that. And this whole thing also, I didn't really think it was Ormond. I mean, I know he's always there, but I didn't really think of it. And I especially appreciate how we learned that it is Ormond which gets connected to the money or the
Mhm.
coin he gives to his who he views as the now rightful king of Westeros, which
Yep.
which would be Daemon.
Yep.
And the fact that it's like that image of Daemon, and you put a face on money and they must be king.
Well, we see that happen these days in real life where
Yeah.
someone's trying to mint themselves on coins while they're still alive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I like how you also brought up the fact, like, to go back to his ascension,
Mhm.
this is not just Ormond. Ormond is and this is classic manipulation. Ormond is able to pull strings
Yeah.
and able to have high tower supporters in King's
Yeah.
Landing
Yep.
because of the current state of rule that Rhaenyra's providing. Now, granted, she wasn't necessarily set up success, but that's a kind
Yeah.
of a separate conversation.
We'll get to that as far as the new small council, but yeah, I mean, I think it is very interesting in the sense that, again, you have these loyalists, and even from day one, that was an issue, whenever they were trying to, take it down on the green and everything, that underbelly of loyalists to to the Greens, to the High Towers has always been there, and so it's been, so again, to see how Ormond has been utilizing those loyalists to the quote unquote air quote legitimate crown. I liked seeing how that sort of all played out this episode, like with the message, and with the pigeon and the folks in Flea Bottom when they went down there and they ran up. It was trying to find out what. So yeah, what I really liked about this episode in particular is, again, it's just we're putting the dragons to the side for a little bit. I mean, even though everybody was trying to find Aegar, but we're really really focusing on really the tactics, whether it's the guerrilla tactics in the Riverlands, but also the tactics that Ormond is utilizing to create dissension within the city.
Yeah, but it's the same dissension that the Targaryen also created when they were trying to get Rhaenyra to her current position. It's just a flip of a coin, but I
Yeah.
think a thought that conjured while you were talking was more of the line of what Sir Criston Cole says in the
Mhm.
episode regarding loyalty from nobles to him. Like it's just whims
Yeah.
of these nobles. Like, you want me to fight for you, I'll fight for you, thinking that in return there is this mutual loyalty. Well, there's not. It's just like, I need you to, you're a weapon, you're a tool, you're a use. Now, I didn't think about it last night while watching the episode, but when I heard you talking, what they're showing in King's Landing with these people and the city folk is more of the whims of favor for the crown. Like, suddenly the crown themselves are dependent on the favor of, how do you do that when before in any other position you've never had to really worry about that, but now you do, because suddenly there's a little bit of popularity going on and it's threatening, and there's validation when you are a royal of the people.
Yeah.
It feels much more legitimate.
Yeah.
But I also, that word legitimacy, I
Mhm.
love the use of it throughout this episode.
Yeah.
And when we talk about whims, whether it's the whims of nobles or the whims of the poor people, there's also the whims of the religious.
Yes.
And there's a very important scene that occurs in this episode, and it's Rhaenyra's praying and Daemon comes in. And then he begrudgingly starts to pray too.
Yeah.
I don't think he really did pray, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I just but it's a continuation of a conversation that they had in a previous episode about what this means and their power as not only rulers but specifically Targaryen.
Yeah.
And Daemon delivers just, this isn't subtle. I mentioned earlier there's a lot of subtle dialogue, but every now and then I think this kind of direct dialogue needs to be said, where it's, you are a woman, there will always be those who oppose you, who wish you failure and ruin. She definitely had a, what do you call it, a Viserys perspective on what this
Yeah.
this will be like. And a little girl's perspective on ruling, it is not what she anticipated. And Daemon just points out, like, it would have never been. You would have had to been born of a different gender for that ever to be even a potential. And honestly, I don't know if how much of it is, yes, and many of you have heard me, I always bring up gender and how much that is a factor in the way Rhaenyra is treated versus other. However, I am not to not point out the fact that I think that can be said of any target, especially at
Yeah.
this time.
Yeah.
I think, and then even in the future. I mean, another thing I like to do when we talk about this show is talk about another show called A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I mean,
Yeah.
the Turian reputation, it doesn't seek favor, it commands favor.
Mhm.
So that loyal is not necessarily there when others often want what you have. And they have the strength, as pointed out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm gonna let
Yep.
you talk about this scene.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do think it goes back to what we earlier too, when I was watching this scene and the scene, the breakdown between the conversation, and again, to go speaking how Valerian, which was, which was really cool. I always enjoy that. And because, of course, that way they could really speak freely. And, the dynamics, a few weeks ago, it was Damon just when it first got back, he just wanted to just keep on driving and conquer the rest of the realm and the other cities. And and then even like in this episode too, not only we see that whenever he was giving the rousing speech to the Gold Cloaks, as far as we're going to double your pay and we're going to rise up new Valeria, and it's just this rousing speech. So it just really gets into it really illustrates Damon's mindset ever since has come back into rule. And so I think, with that, and then of course, thinking about Ren's conversation that she had with the High Scepter last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago, and then even with Orwell, as she was trying to get him, as she was recruiting him to the council and keeping him on as far as a holdover. We're just seeing the dynamics between the two of them, and even to even with Daemon, within the council room, countermanding her and trying to, she even calls him out on it, as far as, what will they make of me if you only obey me at a time and place of your own choosing? So, we're seeing between the two of them this constant butting of heads and philosophies. Daemon again is his might right. Rhaenyra is like, I gotta, not only do I gotta keep the peace with the people, but I've also got to keep the peace with the gods, because the gods are favored. I don't want to upset that. So it's been, again, like I said earlier, it's been an ongoing issue of her, trying to, to your point, the legitimacy was brought up again and again, and these are examples of even her own, the prince consort, even undermining her legitimacy by some of the actions that he's been taking.
Yeah, to go back to when you brought up the speaking in High Valerian. So they are literally in a church.
Yeah,
And they are basically, by speaking in High Valerian, they're speaking in tongues.
yeah,
Now, it's not the tongues of the religion that of the church that they're in, but it's
right.
their own. And
Their own
which,
time. Yeah,
because there's right now a very fascinating theme between that's played out in that scene, but also just echoed in an earlier scene between Ormond and previous scenes also. And this idea of the target are not, they don't understand the culture of this area, of these people who were conquered by Aegon so
right.
many years ago. The target are outsiders.
Yeah.
They command dragons. That nobody even knew that was a thing before they came. And then they saw what it's done. And so at the end of this scene, you have Daemon just say, "You are more than this." And it's not just about like her as a Targaryen saying like she is a god. It's also just like, you don't have to like, this is all bullshit. You are trying to play their game when you have to play this game like a period in order to
Mhm.
continue,
Mhm.
because they're gonna run over you, which is ironic considering Daemon is falling prey to Ormond and what
Yeah.
he's the one behind all these Gold Cloaks deaths and everything. So there's a bit of hypocrisy happening at this simultaneously of like, well, you're caused this because you want revenge for your sons, and you're also like blasphemy for whoever calls them a bastard, even though we all know it's true.
Yep.
And if Joffrey can't be legitimized or legitimate, then you're not legitimate. Like, you're taking this all too personal. At the same time, this whole episode, he took the gold cloak stuff
Yeah.
real personal. And I
Yeah.
and I like how you brought up like that speech he gives to them, which is a very much a Daemon, we're gonna do this. Let's go, rally the troops, send them to their death. And and we have the upper hand. Like, we're gonna figure this out. We've found somebody, they're gonna tell us what it is and all of it. So it's very high spirits.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that he also in that drops Dorne,
Yeah.
which again, there's a lot of back and forth in this episode, very much like last week, but this week the cutting and the splicings of the scenes were much more, I don't know what the right word for it. It was edited together very because the context of Dorne that is given, just we have one scene technically with Ormond in this episode and Daeron as well. And it's this chess match, literal and metaphorical, between about the dry histories of the Hightowers, and we learn more about, more importantly, Mysaria Martell. Oh my God. Dorne is fascinating to me. I love how we get some throughout these series, but you never really know. But there's so much context in here, and I just always think about Oberyn whenever I hear Martell or Dorne mentioned. But he talks about the Targaryens knew nothing of our culture, the faith, the citadel, religious again. What they had, what they still have is strength. Their armies, the obscenity of their dragons. Mysaria Martell outwitted her enemy. A cutting mind can resist the most savage of beasts, and Dorne remains unbroken even today.
Yeah.
What do you think Aaron took from all of that?
Well, there was so many things to unpack in that scene. 'Cause I thought about our discussion last week, but I'll take your first point, which whenever he outwitted Ormond as far as the chess game, which was, again, I guess so many levels to this because Ormond is literally playing chess in this whole thing while a lot of the other folks are just playing checkers. That being said, when Daeron was able to defeat him, and he was ready to, like, he was excited about it. And then, but then of course, like we talked about last week, as far as their relationship, he's like, well, I don't, Ormond threw everything across the, table upset, but then he got up and then counseled him. It's like, look, never be, I'm paraphrasing here, but,
Don't ever say you're sorry when you
sorry for victory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it just speaks to what's going on, I think, in the larger war that's happening here. That it is, Ormond is going to help Daeron basically earn what he sees as, of all these other Targaryens that are out there, Daeron is the one who really should be the rightful one on as the ruler, because he, in his view, he has a temperament. He is, a legitimate heir of Viserys, as far as we know. Could be Criston Cole, but I digress. But
See, can I just point out one thing about that?
Yeah.
Because people bring that up, especially with the hair color. I am pretty sure if that was the case, he wouldn't be able to have a dragon.
Yeah,
He
true.
has to have Targaryen blood.
Yeah.
So unless there's something that I don't know about Criston Cole's lineage, I'm pretty sure Alicent doesn't have any Targaryen blood in her. So like
But
that's the one thing where I don't think that is accurate. He is.
but yeah, but Corlys is not a Targaryen. He's a Valyrian. Their family line also has the power, the ability to train, to fly dragons as well. So, but yeah, we can. I don't want to.
I think that is true and that is fair, but I don't think it extends too far out.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're reaching there, and I think the writers want us to reach there, even though, I mean, I think to go back to what you're talking about, it's more at the end of the day, Daeron is the only Targaryen that was raised in a Hightower house.
Yeah, thanks for
In
pulling me
like,
back. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, pulling me back there. I was getting into just too many theory spirals and fun there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it is. I think that's the key. I mean, he is the one that was raised in a Hightower house. Yeah. Again, even though Daemon does have the dragon, as we've talked about, I think Ormond feels that bringing up the religious text, and the faith and all that, got those things as well. I think Ormond thinks that Daeron has the right temperament to do it, and of course, he will lead him the way. Like, for example, whenever he counseled him to, take out the commoner last week at the end of that last episode, just to to show his legitimacy. Minting the coin again, just to give him the accoutrements of royalty and rule and being a ruler. Having his own coin, and which, as given the fiscal state of King's Landing right now, if that coin starts working its way into circulation again, it's just it's just a tactical advantage that Daeron will have over, and as they continue to undermine her rule in King's Landing. So so again, it's just all, that's why I really like this episode, because it really is like all the machinations of power, and the flexing of power is happening there, and we're seeing how Ormond is doing that. So he's doing the hard, yeah, he's doing the soft, the tactical, the subterfuge, as far as with the coins and all that kind of stuff. But he's also, utilizing the military aspects of it as well, with some, supporting some of the guerrilla efforts that are going on, and also the insurgency with the Gold Cloaks.
The one thing I have to say about the coin is just the line, "This is from the lowliest of faithful, Borosian himself." Freaking Baratheons.
Baratheon.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
lingering in the background, always
yeah,
set to undermine
yeah.
anyone for power, but that's what the Game of Thrones is. We're gonna head over into Team Alicent, which Alicent always has some fire ass lines, but so we knew as soon as it was like at the end of the previous episode, Helena's pregnant. You're like,
Yeah.
yeah, you got to get rid of that thing. I was not necessarily expecting so much resistance from Helaena, but no, it kind of lines up. And this is really where I'm like my example of just subtleness of dialogue, because to me, this whole conversation and the immediate, like how it just turns into a conversation about her brother Aemond. I'm like, so basically you guys are confirming Aemond's the father of this child? Okay. Literally that's where my mind went, especially when Helaena is like, he is still out there. Like Alicent's point is like, Aemon's gone. He's not coming back. He's disappeared. And so we have to protect ourselves. And to me, I was like, well, that's a weird thing. Like, is it a brotherly protection? But my mind really went to like, is he the father of the baby? Because a lot of Alicent's argument and pleas goes to, if Rhaenyra finds out, she will either A, kill it, or B, use it to her advantage against Aemond. So to me, I'm just like, well, like, will she put together that it's Aemond's kid? I don't know the paternity tests that are available in Westeros these days, but I vaguely think that there was some scene in the season 2 towards the end there that kind of gave light to maybe there was like, we do not put inbred the target no matter what. But yeah, so eventually the White Worm manages her way into this whole situation. And again, just when you think like words and vocabulary are some of the only weapons that Alicent knows she has and can utilize, because her twisting this conversation where White Worm has all of the upper hand and just I didn't realize you were such a lapdog now. I mean, ooh, you all know I watch enough reality TV show. You call another woman a lapdog for another woman. Those are fighting words, and those are like, ooh, suddenly somebody is demoting the power that I have. Like, it's just you're being put down and being like, yeah, you don't have power. The person who you are defending has power. So you're nothing. But then she in return offers favor from the high towers.
Yeah.
Again, we talked a lot about favor so far and the
Yep.
whims of it and the people inciting them, and then also knowing that you have to hold up your end of the bargain
Mhm.
when you walk down that road. But it is interesting that all it takes is that conversation and the White Worm suddenly is not running to Ren telling her that you might have another baby to kill. So
Yeah, I was thinking that too, and Alicent definitely, like, I think you made the point there. I mean, she has a way with words, and Mysaria basically, because in any other context, these 2 would never, ever come together, right? But because Ren has chosen to keep Alicent and Helaena prisoner in the castle, then this encounter, just happens to work out. She has, and, whatever, feeling
she's
she's doing her job, but there's also the thing, there's the history there with Daemon. And 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 so, so there's
well,
that.
I think that's why Allison got the upper hand. I mean, because
Yeah,
she also
yeah,
brings up the fact that you don't like Damon and you saw what happened when you were seeking his favor.
yeah,
That, like, Rhaenyra is just like him. Like, at the
yeah,
end of the day, would you stake higher wages on the whims of a dragon rider?
yep,
But
yeah. Which again is again, another parallel to another character. I know we've touched on him a lot this episode, and I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit more. Kristen Cole.
can you explain that? Because I don't know the connection.
Well, again, the commoners being subject to the whims of the dragon riders,
Well,
the nobles. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
the noble
yeah.
class. Period. Yeah,
Yeah, okay, okay, that makes sense. I was like,
yeah,
"Wait a second, is it?"
yeah.
And then, yeah, the conversation that we continue to go back to with him, yep.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that underlying theme, I think that they were really trying to drive home in this episode as far as, but the bloodlines here determine the power. And, all these poor people who are caught in between this blood feud between the, House Targaryen, different half brothers, half sisters, they're caught up in the wake of all that. And so Alicent, yeah, definitely uses that to her advantage, to being able to keep, basically say, "Hey, once all this happens, just I'll do you a solid," whenever Renee eventually just tosses you to the side. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Everyone is fickle when they
yeah,
are playing the Game of Thrones, all feelings. Do you think that there's some irony in the fact that eventually Helena and Alicent find a hidden passageway, and then it basically what's alluded to at the end of the episode is that they get stuck in it and you hear the rats?
yeah, that was definitely crossed my mind when that happened, because, one, cats, being
Yeah.
the ones who they took the advice, and then they were the ones who found that passage that Blood and Cheese came through, and then they found that the wall was, like, bricked up, which, no question, from another thing that went to my mind was, who was the one who bricked up this wall, this passage?
Because my mind went to, have we seen this passage before
Yeah, that's the
in
yeah.
season 1?
That was the passage, I think, that Blood and Cheese came through when they
In
killed,
season 2?
when they ki yeah, season 2, yeah.
In season 2? Okay, what I was getting at was more of
Oh,
I don't think that's the same passage because, it's still in that same old chamber, I think.
that's
I'm getting at the passages that we saw in season 1 when Rhaenyra was younger.
when she was escaping to go hang out with Daemon in Flea Bottom?
Yes, I wonder if
Mm,
the chamber that Alicent and Helaena have been forced to use
that's a good
is
point,
Rhaenyra's
yeah.
old chamber.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. I was thinking,
Because
oh, yeah, yeah,
there was something very weird, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, "Why does this feel familiar?" Because I do remember there being some passages because I think she utilized it, and that was the first
yep,
time her and Sir Christian hooked up.
yep,
So,
yeah,
um
I think you're right. It probably is those passages, again, were but again, gets to the point, who boarded them up? Yeah,
we can't we gotta continue talking about Alicent, but in terms of Alicent and her love for her sons, because we are on team Tangle Tongue and Mangled Faces.
yeah,
Yes, too.
yes.
because we have two mangled faces. There's just, I'm sorry, you guys, I keep quoting from the episode, but there's a lot of really good dialogue. Because not only do we have just an iconic crash out from Aegon, but we also just get Larys, who, initially not a big fan of Larys. Larys is worming his way into my heart because he's just like, you've done nothing but whinge and self-flagellate with a tenacity I find astonishing. You had every advantage in life. You could have risen to greatness. You were a terrible king, but worse than that, you are a terrible man. Like, oh my God. You start with just all of that vocabulary and then you just get right to the nutshell and just kick him right in the nuts. My God. Hats off to you. But I also, it was a compliment in a way too, because it was just like, I admire this, but you're just the perspective. And he could only say that because given this that Aegon is in, and with everything, and to start to hear in this episode the whining about, this is why I think season 1, just that foundation that we're really seeing was needed for in terms of this series. Because this was the first time in a long time when I've ever really thought about like, oh yeah, we saw these dynamics and these brothers relationship way early when they were kids. And at one point early on, Aemond was considered the good brother, definitely was considered the asshole. And that didn't necessarily change, but the more Aemond became who he is now, the more you're like, well, Aegon isn't that bad. I mean, especially he gained a lot of empathy from viewers, I'm sure, when they killed his son. I mean, that when you lose a kid, it's like, okay. Meanwhile, Aemond is just killing kids left and right. So all for an eye, all because he lost his eye. But I just, what is funny about it is, I mean, to go back to Daeron for a moment, I mean, you keep bringing up the true heir, the legitimate heir to, it's all about the father, right? But these two, at the end of their monologues and their, oh, woe is me, my life is horrible, because at the end of the day, I suffered through all of this, and she loved him. She, as in Alicent, loved him, my brother, more than me. Wow. Isn't that just siblings in a nutshell? I mean,
I'm an only child, but
I know.
I'm just saying, but we hear sibling rivalries and all that, and mom or dad favors one over the other. Yeah, that is.
It's just sibling rivalry. It never goes away. You never get out from under it. It's always there. But also it goes into that psychology piece of families, especially large families, of with every kid, they are never born into the same family. So, which is fascinating because you think in your mind, like that's why we're so bonded, because we all had the same childhood. I mean, me and my brothers, as we reflect now in our 30s and two of my brothers 40s on our childhood, we have different we experience the same thing and then have a different interpretation and continue to be like, really? You saw it that way? I was watching this. That's fascinating. Or there was like, oh, you were behind that? I didn't realize that. I didn't. So there's a lot of connections and just kind of like, man, if only we had seen it from the other's perspective, maybe this fight wouldn't have happened, or maybe something would have done differently. But it's a very, I think, in a subtle way, with how this episode is with the Hightowers, and specifically the mashup between Aemond and his psychosis, and just the remembering of some of the most horrible things that he kind of did
Yeah.
but also not understanding, like, he's not present, he's in a different world, so it's all melded, so but also, like, their inner child has
Yeah.
was broken a long time ago
Yeah.
and has never healed, and I don't think any Aryan inner child ever heals. I mean, Rhaenyra right now,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. True. True. Yeah. And then, of course, as a result of that, of course, we see Aemon and his attachment issues, which manifests itself with his now relationship with Alice.
yeah, who's speaking I think earlier you mentioned wanting 2 characters to share the screen or the fact that we have
Mhm.
2 Alicent and White Worm, like,
Yeah.
why would we ever get them in any other circumstance? I
Right.
need an Alice and Helaena scene.
Yeah. To get the two seers together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also in a lot of this stuff, I mean, Aegon, of course, pointing out the obvious of
Yeah.
himself, but also then mentioning that envy, even
Mhm.
though it's his younger brother.
Yeah.
I was told not to fight. I couldn't pick up a sword and I was the heir, right? There's a protectiveness there
Yeah.
that then he had to watch his brother do the quote unquote manly things and just rise into this viewpoint of being a warrior.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
envied that. Like there was a
Mhm.
freedom that Aemond had that he would have never experienced.
Right.
And then you're reminded of Aemond and his childhood and
Mhm.
how Aegon treated him like shit. And
Yeah.
also his cousins.
Yeah.
Rhaenyra's kids were cannot claim innocence. I
No.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
they it was self-defense when they poked his eye out, but
Yeah. Yeah.
they at the same time, they also made fun of him because it was all goes back to the dragon and that
Mhm.
relationship, and
Mhm.
you're either part of this family because you have one, or you're kind of cast aside.
Yeah.
There's also what we're finding beyond just the sibling rivalry is the rivalry of dragon riders within the Targaryen family. Like, you're
Mhm.
either a dragon rider or you're just an average Targaryen.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
have the blood.
Yeah. And the hair. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We saw that a lot. We saw that some with Bela in their conversation.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
They eventually make it back to Rook's Rest, and where Tess happens to show up and is like, "Hey,
Oh,
guys,
no.
wash the
Hey.
sword," and I'm like, "You know what? I
Yeah.
accept."
Yeah.
And especially when they're all talking about Bravos and
Mhm.
plans and the schemes, and it's just I don't know, I'm having fun with the Laris and Aegon
Oh, yeah.
storyline. I'm having fun just across the board.
Yeah.
And throughout all of this, we still get some action. We still get wars and fighting
Yeah.
as another literal chess game is being played between Sir Criston Cole and Sir Oscar Tully, and the battle over the rivers and the burning of the crossings before, and I like it. I like how they very much and a sense of war with these scenes, and they have utilized Criston Cole and company that way for several episodes now, but they always do manage to give him a monologue, and
Yeah.
we've only referred to the monologue about a dozen different times
Yeah.
because that's why one scene,
Yeah.
one monologue, one speech works because you don't just want to have a monologue for the sake of it. Like it
Right.
needs to tie into other things that are happening because as much as we're jumping around in this world and there are different people and different interactions, there has to be a reason or else it's just fluff. And
Yeah.
that so far this season, there ain't really any fluff.
No.
Everything is happening and it doesn't feel mechanical. It feels natural and it makes sense to the purpose of the episode and also more importantly the overall structure of the season.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with Cole and I'm glad you brought, touched on the guerrilla warfare, but seeing like the tactics that were going on because, at the beginning, Oscar was talking about, the issues with the camps and then of course we, see the fighting happen and the camp being invaded and stuff. And then of course the rivermen getting ahead of them and putting, the traps down to, whenever Colt, the horse got maimed and then having to go through the bog and basically it was just it was truly like a war of attrition and they finally do get to the bridge and then it's all burnt out and Gawain just like taps out. He's like, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, and he's like questioning why Cole is doing this, and Cole's like, look, one of the things they reminded us in his monologue, to your point about having these monologues not for fluff but for a purpose, is it was a reminder he isn't one of the greatest fighters and warriors in Westeros. I mean, going back to season 1, I mean, he was the one that took Daemon out during the tournament, which I think, got people's attention. So, and of course, and he's risen up the ranks. So, it gets, yeah, we understand his purpose now as far as why he's dragging on, moving on. And it's not for the glory of the would he like to get Alicent's favor again? Yes. But at the end of the day, he wants to be songs to be sung about him as far as like why he's one of the greatest warriors in Westeros here, and so this is why he continues this challenge and keeps driving on even as he loses more and more men as this war progresses. So, but yeah, Wayne's like, I'm done. I guess he's gonna find his way back to Old Town or Stumbleton.
I don't think Wayne's done. I think that he's in this despite it. He just didn't realize, because he's not a warrior, he's a noble.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a difference. And you see it, and we've seen it for a while now, that Gawain differs to Criston.
yeah,
And it's his crew, it's his say, nobleship aside,
yeah.
titleship aside. So and so there's a realization like, no, you were sent to die. Essentially,
Mhm.
accept that and move on,
Yeah.
because you're thinking like, oh, this will end all lovingly. That's not the reality of war. So, all right. Well, I think that it for us tonight in the House of the Dragon. We will continue our conversation next week, obviously, just over halfway through.
Hey y'all, it's Will. Real big favor to ask: if you're liking what we're doing here, please hit the like button, drop us a comment, and also subscribe. We're growing this channel and we appreciate each and every one of you.